Hi, I'm in Carmen, Manitoba. I'm here with Dennis Lange, pulse and soybean specialist with Manitoba Agriculture. Dennis, I was listening to a recent Crop Talk webinar you did where you were talking about two types of blight. One, which is hard to pronounce, I'll try it here. It's mycosphaerella blight and bacterial blight. Now, why is it important for growers to know the difference between those two when they're growing peas?
Well, the reason you want to know the difference between the two of those is one you can spray for and one you can't.
Okay.
The bacterial blight is, as it sounds, a bacteria. Typically, you'll start to see those lesions form near the top to the mid portion of the canopy, and usually within 10 to 14 days of some type of weather event. It kind of damages the plant and allows that disease to come in. So if you're looking at the top portion of the canopy of a pea crop and you're starting to see some brown lesions, with those brown lesions you'll see a bit of a yellowish ring around it. That's a bacterial blight. That's not something you can really do anything about. Mycosphaerella blight, though, is a different story. There are fungicides you can use, and what's really important with mycosphaerella blight is scouting for it. Knowing that if it's present, and then evaluating, things like plant stand and also weather conditions to make that decision on whether or not it's time to spray or not.
And mycosphaerella, when you spray for that, it's more of a preventative, correct?
Yeah, it's a fungicide, it's a preventative, but it's also, looking at things like, is there any disease present? And every field will have mycosphaerella blight at some point in time in the growing season. The later it moves into the crop, the less yield it's going to affect. So if it's affecting the stages at really early pod fill to pod fill stage, then at that time mycosphaerella blight isn't going to hurt you at all.
Okay.
Whereas if it's early in the season, at that early flowering stage is what we're approaching right now, that's when you really want to be on top of it.
So Dennis, when it comes to mycosphaerella blight, where is it actually living in the field itself?
Well, typically you will see it, it will overwinter in the previous year's stubble. And what has happened, like we've done this at diagnostic school where we've gotten straw from a pea field from the previous year, brought it into our plots here and be able to see some infection. Even on years when you think it's really dry and there wasn't much infection, we can usually get pretty good infection in the lower canopy. And that's where you really want to look for mycosphaerella blight, is in that lower canopy.
Okay. Now when it comes to the decision-making process for spraying for mycosphaerella blight, what does that look like for a grower?
Well, there's a few things to look at. You can go online and do a search for fungicide, mycosphaerella fungicide decision-making worksheet, and it'll go through things like, how dense is your plant canopy? Is it a thin stand, or is it a thicker stand? It'll look at things like what the weather forecast is for the next 5 to 10 days. It'll look at things like how wet your pants are in the mornings, if it's very dewy. Canopy closure is really important as well. If you've got a dense canopy, that's going to give you more of a concern in that respect. The final thing is looking at disease and whether there's disease present. Now, when you peel back the canopy and you look down into the lower canopy, on those lower leaves, you'll see the initial symptoms as small purple freckles. Just a small purple freckle on the bottom. And when you do your counts, there's an estimate you can do when you as far how much disease is there. And if you work through that worksheet, if you come up with a score of 65 or higher, that would indicate that is the correct time to be spraying that first application. So again, early flowering is when you want to be scouting for it. Looking at the weather forecast, the plant canopy, is disease present, looking at those factors, and the course of weather forecast over the next 5 to 10 days. If you go out there the first time and you're at 80, well then you should have been there a little earlier. If you go out there and it's a drier year and you're only sitting at about 50 when you do that score, then what I would suggest doing is coming back in another 3 or 4 days and reevaluating. If you're doing that, you might be able to get away with that one application of fungicide rather than 2. And if you're going with 2 fungicide applications, try to go with 2 different fungicide groups to help slow resistance down in the future.
Is there a likelihood of seeing more mycosphaerella blight when it's a wetter year compared to a drier year?
Oh, most definitely. On a wetter year, you'll see mycosphaerella blight a lot more.
Okay.
Last year when we did it as part of our CDS exercises here, the first time we did it, we were already at a score of 80. So we should have been out there a little bit earlier. If, however, when you're scouting, you're not seeing a disease present, again, nothing wrong with waiting a little bit for that first application.
Dennis, is there anything about mycosphaerella blight you wanted to mention that I didn't ask you about today?
I think just for the most part is monitoring and making that decision accordingly.
Okay.
On dry years, you'll be able to wait a little bit, and on wetter years, you'll be in there a little bit earlier. And take it as a field-by-field basis. Rotation in peas usually is 1 in 6 years, so it's not necessarily that rotation on that field, but the disease is present on pea stubble in the neighborhood. So again, that's just something you have to be aware of.
Okay, great. Thanks for meeting with me today.